Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 5 of our Sexual Assault Victim Advocate Fundamentals Training Series. Today's presentation is on Money Matters, Economic Empowerment for Survivors. Before we begin, I would like to provide a sensitive subject matter warning. Today's training may cause participants to experience strong emotional reactions, and we encourage you to take care of yourselves and reach out to your support networks for help if needed. I'll be putting some reminders in the chat, and with that, I will turn it over to our presenters for them to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Good morning, all. My name is Stephanie Ertis. I'm the Associate Director at MCASA. This is the third time I've been with you this week, so excited to be back and kind of wrapping up this week with this presentation. I have two colleagues from the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, so I want to take a moment so they can introduce themselves. So, Anna, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Michaels. I am a bilingual legal advocate here at SALI.
Great. And then Emma?
Hi everyone, my name is Emma Kaplan and I am a law clerk and advocate with SAVAT as well.
Excited to be presenting with both of them today and having them bring their expertise as legal advocates to this training. So we added this training a couple of years ago because we found that money was something that advocates, some of them weren't talking a lot about, some of them didn't feel like trained to talk about it. And it's just a crucial element of our advocacy to be able to talk to survivors about money and to be able to empower them to make the decisions that they need to make about their own finances that may help them in many, many ways. So to get started, we are going to jump right in with this question that I have for you. So we're going to come back to this. So don't put anything in the chat yet. But if your first name begins with the letters A through F, I want you to think about what you would do with $200,000. So if you just got a check, legitimate check for $200,000, what would you do with it? And if your name starts, your first name starts with the letters G through N, what would you do with an extra $10,000 a year? If you got a $10,000 bonus every year on January 1st, what would you do with that? And then if your first name begins with letters A through Z, what would you do with an extra $850 a month? So if you got an extra $850 a month, not associated with your job, not associated with anything else, just an extra $850 a month, what would you do with it? So take a second if you want to write this down or make a note to yourself or take a picture of it and just think about what you would want to do with that money. And we're going to come back to that in a couple of slides. So let's talk about our learning objectives today. So again, we want this to be interactive. You won't just be learning from the three of us. We all hold knowledge about this in this space. So we want to learn from each other and learn together today. These are our objectives. So they're things for you to consider during our time together to prepare for the knowledge that you might want to share on this topic. And as always, we invite you to share at the comfort level that is right for you. We're not forcing anyone to share anything, but we know some of you have been doing this for a while. Some of you bring perspectives from other fields. So we want you to feel like you can also share and be a part of the teaching and learning here. So our learning objectives today are to describe the economic cost of sexual assault for survivors, and then to understand the role social and institutional inequalities play in a survivor's financial security. You're going to be able to understand financial abuse and the tactics abusers use to impact a survivor's financial security. And then Anna and Emma are going to talk about developing strategies for discussing money with clients and developing strategies for cultivating financial stability and safety for survivors or clients facing economic challenges. So they're going to give you some real skill building elements to this. So we'll talk a little bit about theory to begin with and some of the research and data. And then we're really going to get into some of those actual practical things that you can do and that you should consider when working with survivors. So I already gave you a little bit of an overview, but like I said, we're going to talk about the economic impact. We're going to talk about talking to survivors about money, give you a little bit more information on the Sexual Assault Legal Institute, and then we'll close with any questions. I do want to say that, we live in a society where people are taught not to talk about money. And so this can lead to survivors and their families not feeling safe to engage in these conversations. Or oftentimes, people may not fully be aware of their entire financial situation or the options that are available to assist them with their financial situation. So they may be dealing with an abusive situation, they may be recently sexually assaulted, and they don't know that there are remedies and ways for them to kind of fortify their financial situation. But we know that imposing silence and lack of awareness is a direct result of inequality and oppression. So we want to use these tactics to fight against that. We have the tools to empower survivors and their communities to receive the financial support they need. And I'm really excited and passionate about this training because when I was doing direct service work, this information gave me a way to quantify what I was seeing in the field and really helped me to understand the tools that could be used to help people economically and to really help survivors use what was available to them to make those decisions that they needed to make for their own healing and their own safety. So let's first dive into the economic impact of sexual violence. And the last thing I want to say before we get into this content is if this topic is new to you, you may have some strong emotional reactions to the content, if you are an advocate or if you are a survivor yourself. So if you are feeling angry or frustrated or upset, that's totally normal. And we encourage you, as always, to take care of yourself during those moments. If you have to step away, just know, as always, you're going to receive the slides and the recording that are available to you. So if you have to go through this at a different pace, please take that opportunity to do that. So we're going to start with some poll questions. So Alyssa's launching a poll for us. So when the survivor discloses to you or they're seeking services from you, how often do you find that money is a barrier or a factor to them receiving the support, resources, or services that they need for healing and justice? For example, maybe they can't afford counseling or they can't leave an abuser because they have financial control over them. Maybe they're afraid to report or seek services because they don't understand that some of them are free or how much they might cost. They might need childcare. They might have a hard time finding transportation to appointments at a courthouse. So how often is money a barrier for survivors? And what does that look like? Is it every individual that you might be working with? Is it most individuals? Is it every so often that it comes up as a barrier? Or is it rarely a barrier? And for some of you, it might not be a barrier at all. So I'll just give you a couple of more seconds to answer this question. We've got more than half of the people that have answered it so far. All right, I'm going to end this poll and share the results with you. So you'll see that most of the time, so more than almost 70% of our participants today have run into some kind of financial barrier, and they're seeing that more often than not. We have a couple folks that are seeing it every time, and then it's still very few folks, only 4% are not seeing it at all. And as we go through this, maybe it's because money's not coming up or it's not part of your intake or your case management process. So you may find some ways to look at that a little bit differently. Or you may be working in a situation where maybe the survivors you're working with actually don't need financial resources, which also happens. So I want to take a look at the second poll we have. And if money is not a barrier, I want you to say why. And so some of you, some of you answered that it was never a barrier, but for some of you that answered questions like it was sometimes a barrier or mostly a barrier, when it's not, think of those circumstances and think about why it's not a barrier. Is it because survivors in the community generally have what they need, which is really possible, and that's what we always want to work towards? Is it because all the services that a survivor could need in your community are at no or very low cost? Does money just never come up in conversation with working with survivors, which is really legitimate? Or again, is money just always a barrier? If it's always like this present factor in working with a survivor. So it looks like we're seeing in the poll, let me give you a couple more seconds, give a couple more people to answer. We're not quite at 50% yet. I feel like I'm giving you a pop quiz on a Friday, and I know that's not that's not always fun, but there's no right or wrong answer here. So great. We have about 65% of folks that have answered. So I'm going to end the poll, share the results with you. So we're seeing that even asking this question, why money is not a factor, that almost 30% of you are answering that or 80% of you are answering it's just always a factor. So that's great that we're all here this morning to talk about that. There are some folks that are saying that there are a lot of free resources or survivors in their community generally have what they need, but it looks like that's rare. So we may be working towards that in a systematic way and making sure our services are at low or no cost and that our survivors have what they need, but we're not there yet. So we're going to talk about how we can still help survivors get what they need and get some of that financial security. So let's start out with, and I'll invite you to take a deep breath before we get into this slide because it's a lot of numbers and it can be really tough information to hear because we know that money is important and certain amounts of money can be life-changing. And this is the money that survivors don't have because they were sexually assaulted. So like we talked about, many people don't know how much of a barrier money can pose to a survivor of sexual assault. When someone chooses to commit sexual violence, that doesn't just leave physical and emotional wounds. It can affect every aspect of a survivor's life, including their financial stability. So research has shown that the financial cost of being a sexual assault survivor is incredibly high. The CDC did a huge research study on this a couple years ago. We're edging to the point where it was about 10 years ago. I think it was in 2017. And they found that someone surviving rape or attempted rape had an estimated loss of income of $122,461 over their lifetime. So this was, like I said, this was almost 10 years ago. So that has probably gone up with inflation and the way money works. So it's probably closer to 150 or maybe even closer to $200,000. For someone who survives childhood sexual abuse, that cost is close to $300,000. And nationally, the economic cost, including costs related to healthcare, mental health care, productivity loss, and the impact on higher education and childcare, is even larger. So these costs add up for our society as a whole, and they are reaching $3.1 trillion in productivity, criminal justice, and healthcare costs. So this is an estimated 234 billion with a B, billion in criminal justice costs, 1.2 trillion in medical costs, and 1.6 trillion in lost productivity at work. That is the cost that we all pay when someone commits sexual violence. And you can find this study in our SAVAT library and on our SAVAT training website. So I want to say the researchers that did this weren't sexual assault advocates, they were mathematicians. So sometimes when Alyssa and I have presented that, people have really challenged where we got this information. And there is a full study about this. This was a really thoughtful CDC-funded research project to really try to quantify what survivors were experiencing. So I want you to think about what our society could do, what our country, what our state, what our county could do if we had $3.1 trillion. This is community changing money. What could we do if we didn't have sexual assault in our society? And what could we do with those funds? We could put them into education. We could put them into food security, housing. The possibilities are endless here. So let's go back to this question I asked at the beginning. So I want you to drop in the chat, if you feel comfortable, what you would do with this money. So A through F, if your first name starts A through F, what would you do with $200,000? So put your money amount, $200,000, and then a dash or an equal sign, and what you would do with it. If your first name is G through N, what would you do with that extra $10,000 a year? So put $10,000 and then what you would do with that. And if your first name starts with an O through Z, what would you do with $850 extra a month? I'm going to pull up the chat on my end and start looking at some of your answers. Some folks would invest in stocks and bonds with dividends, so even turning that into more money. Would invest and connect with domestic violence agency to help abusers, so putting that money back into causes that you really care about. Probably on the conservative side, factoring in the impact for children, family members, all of those things. Alyssa also, just FYI, dropped the study in the chat too. So if some of you are really data heads and really want where that information came from, you can access it right now. So we're talking about improving quality of life for everyone with the money. Oh, here we go. We've got put it into savings and save it to pay bills. If you had $850 extra a month, $250, buy a new car, vacation and save. I love, April, that your first one was buy a new car. When we do this exercise, we get a lot of people that are like, they want to put it in savings, they want to put it in stocks and bonds. But I love the idea of just buying a new car, using it to buy something that's really important to you and really can be life-changing. New cars can be a really powerful thing to have. Worrying about car maintenance is a total drag. And I say that's the minimal thing it is. It can create a lot of stress in someone's life. So I love the idea of buying a new car. With an extra 10,000, and definitely saving up for a new car. We've got other new cars. I hope you all get the new cars that you deserve. You definitely deserve them. Owning a little house on the beach. Absolutely, Danielle. That's a brilliant idea. Tara's going to travel with her extra money, putting it in savings, paying off student loan. Absolutely. With $850, paying off debt, building savings. This is life-changing money. Saving for a house. Absolutely. These are great answers. Using it for self-care, donating extra money, maxing out your Roth. Absolutely. High yield. Some of you are real into the savings and stocks and bonds and stuff, and I love it. That's a great answer. Using it to visit relatives, for using it to invest. Again, we're seeing a lot of these great answers. We've got lots of people that are dreaming of new cars, which I also love. So the reason we do this is buying a new car, being able to invest in your retirement, being able to use that money to visit family members, being able to use it to travel. This is crucial life-changing money. So it's important for us to remember that is what survivors are having taken away from them. It's not just the physical pain. It's not just the emotional pain. Their life is also affected in these other ways. And so let's look more specifically about how this impacts sexual assault survivors. So I'm not going to read all the things on this cost of surviving sexual assault chart, but I do want to point out some of these categories. So in the area of work, what can really be affected financially for survivors is a loss of wages if they have to take unpaid leave. It might be a loss of work altogether, so being fired or quitting. It could be what we call underemployment. So it could impact their ability to get a raise or their ability to get a promotion if their work quality is affected. They could lose focus, performance, or have other productivity issues, which then could snowball into losing, promotions, losing losing increases in their salary or losing professional development opportunities. Also losing out on projects if they're having a hard time completing that work because they're having a hard time focusing. All of those things could contribute to a financial loss for them. In education, and this is where I was an advocate for students for over 10 years. I worked on a college campus, and I saw the impact in these students greatly. And this could also impact students in any kind of program. So it could be skipping class or withdrawing from a course that could have a financial impact. They could get poor grades in that course and have to take it over again. They might have to drop out of that institution altogether or for a semester, which would have a financial penalty. They might not complete their degree, or it may take them longer to complete their degree, which could have a financial impact. Same thing if they transfer schools or transfer programs. It could definitely have a negative impact on their educational goals and possibly change what they were planning to do for their career altogether. And so all of those things could have an impact financially in the area of education. And student loan debt for colleges and universities is not forgivable. So they owe that money regardless of whether they graduate or not. And there's very little that they can do to have that eliminated or forgiven. So this could have a huge impact on their financial future if they are assaulted while they are attending a college or university. Health, these are some of the things that you are very much familiar with. It could be injury, mental health services, physical health services. Sometimes symptoms of post-traumatic stress can manifest physically with headaches and digestive issues. Also, if we talk about access, we're talking about things like childcare. They have to pay extra for childcare so they can go to counseling appointments or court appointments. It could create a higher cost of living for them in housing if they have a bad rental record. So if they have a poor tenant history because they abandoned a lease, that may mean that they're paying a higher rent somewhere else. Transportation could be impacted. So there's many things access-wise that could be impacted. And some other things that might happen is poor credit. Like, do they have to put some things on their credit card they weren't expecting? Was there property damage? Is there debt that they occurred in other or accrued in other places? Or are they having to pay legal fees out of pocket before they might be getting reimbursed? So we're going to talk about some of the ways that they can recoup some financial funds, but sometimes that isn't fast. So they need access to money immediately so they can do some of those other things. One of the things, I'll give a quick example before we move on. One of the things that I saw when I worked on college campuses is sometimes when you have a sexual assault forensic exam done, they will take your sheets, your pillowcase, your comforter. I've seen them take winter coats or shoes. This is then leaving that person maybe without a winter coat or without bedding. Or maybe even if that bedding wasn't taken as evidence, they don't want, if they were assaulted in that space, they don't want to look at that bedding anymore. They can't sleep on those sheets anymore. Sheets and bedding are expensive. Winter coats can be expensive. So there was this immediate cost of, where am I going to get money for a winter coat? Or where am I going to get money to replace my pillowcase or my sheets? Or, where am I going to get money to move if I can't sleep or feel peace or feel safe in my apartment anymore? So those were some very immediate things that were happening to sexual assault survivors. And then my agency that I worked for was actually able to help provide like small loans and small stipends for them to be able to manage some of that. But just thinking of just immediately, there may be some costs that they aren't prepared for. So one of the things that we want to do is provide some voice to this situation. So we have this video about the workplace and sexual assault. So we want you to hear specifically from survivors on their experience with working and with being a sexual assault survivor. So I'm going to play this at a volume that makes sense on my computer, but you may have to adjust up or down to be able to hear it well on your own computer.
It actually was hard to actually just get a job. It's hard to, go out there and sell yourself and say, I'm a great, I'm a great hard worker, because people will be like, why haven't you been working for 2 years? And then, you can't actually say, well, that's because I was raped in 2008.
There was also about a 3-year period when I just felt absolutely exhausted. I found it very difficult to get out of bed. I found it very difficult to get on with my life. And I didn't want often to be out in the world.
So my career took a complete left turn, or right turn, I'm not sure. But my turn, let's start that over again. My career took a complete turn as a result of the rape. I mean, prior to that, I was actually a film producer, and I'd been working, pretty busy, active life for a small film production company, and it was exciting stuff. We were shortlisted for the Oscars. I went to the Oscars, to the post-traumatic stress disorder, the anxiety, the depression. The complete lack of energy I had after the assaults totally robbed me of my ability to work as effectively. So I had to leave my job.
The amount of brain space that getting out of bed in the morning, getting clothes on, doing the day-to-day of life suddenly became completely impossible.
It was actually years before I was able to work again. I wasn't able to go back to the previous job. I wasn't able to find a job afterwards.
I ended up quitting without having anywhere to go in terms of a job. And just, it was just very difficult to deal with those things at the same time. I was trying to phone various people, organisations like Women's Aid and Rape Crisis, sort of because I didn't want to do that at home because I was still with my ex. I'd be doing that sort of like in meetings room, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'd be going to the toilets and crying and that kind of thing, trying to hide it.
I call that year my zombie year because I was pretty much a zombie.
And of course this had an effect on my career. When once I'd been very energetic and very driven, I found it much harder to get the kind of energy that I needed to go forward and to make work.
It's not just that you're crying all the time. You're crying all the time because you don't have a career and because you literally feel like you're devoid of your own personality as a result of the assault. And it affects the way you trust people in your relationships, and because your career is affected, it affects your finances, which can then have a massive impact, 5-10 years later, because you can't buy property.
At the moment, we're seeing a way of talking about mental health in the workplace where it's starting to become allowed to be able to talk about depression, but coming out and disclosing to your employer that you've been the victim of a sexual trauma is still full of taboo and stigmatized. And the number of women who have told me that they have lost their jobs as a result of disclosing it's just mind-boggling, and it's not right.
Okay, friends, just trying to get to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about financial abuse. So I'm glad we were able to hear from the survivors. Alyssa and I have seen this video multiple times, and every time it captures my attention, hearing their stories about their experience trying to work and trying to gain financial stability in the aftermath of a sexual assault, and how challenging that is. But we want to shift directions here too and talk about financial abuse, because that can also be a factor. So not only does the cost of healing services and justice rack up for a survivor, they may also be victims of financial abuse. So this is where they've had less access to their money or economic stability because someone is taking advantage of them, because the abuser is intervening and trying to use money to control them. So again, we hear this word control. So we know that sexual violence is about power and control. So this is just another way that an abuser can use a lever of power to gain control over a survivor. So financial and economic abuse occur when an abuser controls their victim's access to shared or individual assets. They might conceal information from them, limit their current or future earning potential. It's one of the most powerful weapons of keeping a survivor trapped in an abusive relationship. And it very much diminishes the survivor's ability to stay safe after leaving the situation. Research indicates that financial abuse occurs in 99% of domestic violence cases. So I know a couple of days ago you met with Tony to talk about intimate partner sexual violence, which we know is common in domestic violence situations. And 75% of women, they did not survey men or non-binary folks, but 75% of women in domestic violence shelters reported experiencing at least one incident of intimate partner sexual violence during their past year. So there's a huge overlap here. So the financial abuse they may be experiencing alongside the sexual assault and sexual abuse means that we really need to kind of talk about this topic and how they might be experiencing some financial abuse. And so let's talk about some forms of financial abuse. And then we're going to have some time for you to answer a question also about what you're seeing or what you have seen when working with survivors or in the field as it relates to financial abuse. So when it comes to employment-related abuse, an abuser may be preventing the survivor from going to work or demanding that the survivor quit their job or preventing them from looking for a job or attending job interviews. So they might be causing the victim to lose out on jobs by physically harming them before an important meeting or an interview, or they may be calling or harassing them at work or showing up at their workplace that also affects their ability to be employed. So there are other ways that employment-related abuse can happen as well, like forbidding them from attending job trainings or advancement opportunities. So think about in your own life when you've had the ability to take on a new project that was going to help advance your career, or attend a training, or attend a professional development experience like a conference. If someone's withholding that from or impacting that for a survivor, it can really start to affect their employment and their ability even to earn the money that they are earning at that job currently, or even getting promoted or getting a raise. So let's look at coercive debt, because this is something that I really don't see in the field being talked a lot about, but it can have a dramatic impact on survivors. So maybe the abuser is applying for credit cards, obtaining loans, or opening accounts in the survivor's name without their knowledge. So think about intimate sexual violence in a situation where people share money or share bank accounts or share assets or are married and might be filing their taxes. This abuser would have all the information they would need to open up a credit card in the name of the survivor, and they could really destroy their credit or do some serious damage with that tool. They might force the victim to obtain loans they don't want to obtain or sign financial documents they don't want to sign. They may use threats of physical force to convince the survivor to make credit-related transactions. They might refinance a house or a car without that person knowing. They might stop paying bills, which would also decrease someone's credit score. Or they might force them to, or in their name, file false insurance claims or false tax claims that could really have some serious repercussions financially for a survivor in the future. So they may also withhold access. So they may prevent the survivor from accessing their financial information, records, or documents. So, you probably know the password to your online bank account. You probably know or have that app even on your phone. But in an abusive situation, someone might be preventing that, or they might be changing those passwords without letting that person know, and then causing some further financial abuse. So when you're talking to survivors, we'll talk about this a little bit later, it's important to not judge what situation they might be in. I feel like it's easy to be like, how could you not know how much money you make? Or how could you not know your passwords? You're not in an abusive relationship. So that, that's not something that you have access to, but that may be something that people are using to abuse them. So we don't want to add more judgment to that. They may withhold funds from the survivor or the survivor's children to obtain basic needs such as food and medicine. So they may be using basic needs and the funding of basic needs to really also abuse them. They also might be hiding assets. So they might be putting money that should be available to both folks in the relationship. They may be hiding it in other ways so that they are preventing the survivor from accessing it. There are lots of other forms of economic abuse, so I just want to go over a couple of them. Maybe forcing the survivor to give them money or give them ATM cards or credit cards, or the one I saw the most when I worked with college students is students have an ID card. And maybe some of you that went to a college or university, you remember having an ID card. And in some cases, they work as debit cards, so you can use them in the cafeteria or the bookstore. Or I know when I went to school many, many, many years ago, I could use mine at the local pizza places. And so, they wouldn't say like, oh, this person stole my credit card, but they might say, you might see a student survivor in that situation where someone's taken their student ID or is abusing their student ID and using money on that card for themselves without the survivor knowing. They may refuse to work or contribute to the family income. They may force the survivor to work at a family business without pay, or they may steal the survivor's identity, property, or inheritance. So these are a couple of other things that you might see as financial abuse. So I want to invite you as advocates and just people that have varied experiences to write in the chat. As an advocate, what are some of the examples of financial abuse that you have seen survivors experience? Because I really want you to have a chance to tell us what your experience has been. And while you're doing that, I want to talk about our last element of financial abuse and economic empowerment. And then we'll go back to look in the chat to see some of the other examples of financial abuse that you all have seen. So as we wrap up this first section of the training, we want to end with this very important topic of inequity and economic disparity for underserved populations. So this could be BIPOC, disabled, folks that have disabilities, the LGBTQ plus community, immigrants, and others that experience oppression in our society. They all face greater financial hardship. The prevalence of sexual assault increases as annual household income decreases. So survivors with marginalized identities often fall through the cracks when seeking support services, or they do not seek support services at all. And financial stability can be a barrier to that. So for you as advocates and service providers, it's important for you to understand so that you and your organization can work towards reducing these barriers. So underserved populations already experience barriers to economic attainment without adding this extra layer of survivorship. So on the screen, I'm going to move the screen, are some examples of where we see economic disparity. So things like the wage gap. So they affect women and especially women of color. The job fields with more women are typically lower paid. So for example, education jobs versus tech jobs. Mass incarceration, gentrification, and redlining often affect people of color. The workplace and school harassment for LGBTQ plus folks. Research has found a strong association between food and housing insecurity and intimate partner and sexual violence. Going back to the LGBTQ community, youth experience homelessness at a higher rate, and that may be as a result of coming out to their families. So that can be an extra economic disparity. And while we know that people who are living in poverty, who are homeless, and who are incarcerated are more likely to experience sexual violence, we also know, too, that those folks are disproportionately people of color, people with disabilities, and people in the LGBTQ community. So people from underserved populations experience so many barriers to economic security, while simultaneously being more at risk for being survivors of sexual violence. All of these layers of trauma, violence, and oppression intersect with economic instability and economic insecurity. And this is why this training is so important. And we continue to explore new ways to save survivors who have experienced injustice and stress. Serve survivors. I'm sorry. Let me start that again. So we want to explore new ways to serve survivors who have experienced injustice and stress from so many places, including their financial situation. So I'm going to go back to this question. And as an advocate, what are some of the examples of financial abuse that you have experienced? I'm going to open up my chat box. and see what you have written. So, some manipulation on renting in quotes. April wrote, in an apartment or house that the victim has to pay for, and they keep the money. Absolutely. Using the court system. Oh, Sylvia, you are ahead of the game here. We're going to talk about the court system in other trainings, but yes, using that to continue to harass the victim in court, so that can have an economic impact if they keep having to go back to court. And then you gave a great example, so thank you. So some other things are applying for Social Security benefits, and the victim was proved, the abuser tells the victim that they owe them because without them they wouldn't have been able to apply. So absolutely. Deleting or depleting accounts and creating bad credit issues, 100%. Yeah, these are great answers. Taking the keys to the car and hiding them, absolutely affecting their transportation. One of the other things that I've seen is also making sure that all the cars are in the abuser's name. So if the person would use that car and the abuser's unhappy with it, they can report it stolen. Typically in those situations, the other thing I also saw was people understanding that this was an abuse tactic if it was reported stolen. But also, if the car's not in their name, there's no proof that they own it. So absolutely. Taking credit cards without the person's knowledge. Yeah. Being locked out of their house, changing the locks. Oh, that is a wicked one. Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of abuse of credit cards and stolen money, money saved for college, and using that to buy a car. Absolutely. Losing assets in a joint bank account. These are all great examples of financial abuse. So thank you all for contributing to that. So I have one more slide before I want to hand it over to our sexual assault legal advocates. And we found this quote a couple of years ago. It was from CalCASA, so the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault. They have a new name now. They're now called Valor US. But they did some research and some collecting of information around this topic. And we really felt like it was important to end with this part of our presentation, with this quote to kind of sum up the experience of survivors. So the economic burden of survivors of sexual assault is real. Women at the margins are the ones who bear the brunt of the harshest realities, including sexual violence, and they do so with the least resources. The most vulnerable communities facing poverty and economic hardship, as well as sexual violence, and are dealing with a compounding and layering of burdens that impact basic needs, their ability to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves and their family. Services need to provide the comprehensive and flexible support that these survivors need. And I will say, since 2017, I've been doing this for much longer than that, but I have seen in almost the last 10 years, some resources grow in this area to help with food, clothing, shelter, not just to help with the physical and emotional parts of the aftermath of a sexual violence, but some of these financial elements as well. And I think as advocates, we want to keep advocating at that system level for these assets for our survivors. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emma to start talking about how you can really start these conversations and really start to work with survivors and provide you some practical skills and tools. So Emma, I'm turning it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Steph. So yeah, like Steph said, we're now going to be moving into kind of some strategy around how to have conversations in a way that centers the survivor and is making sure that we are letting them be the expert of their life. So yeah, the first thing that I want to just note is that these conversations are not one size fits all. And in order to have a conversation that's effective and worthwhile for our clients, that really does give them the guidance and builds on their strength, we want to acknowledge what sort of things might impact their current financial state and what they might be looking for from us. So this includes recognizing that there's a wide range of circumstances, needs, and goals, and acknowledging that just because we might think that something is urgent or necessary doesn't necessarily mean that it's a priority for the survivor. So really wanting to think that safety is subjective, and we really want to think about based on our conversation that we have with survivors, what safety means for them and how we can partner with them with the tools that we have in order to serve them as an advocate. So there's 3 client scenarios that I want to share with you guys just to kind of share and give an example for how we can consider different needs and priorities that each client may have and that they're not all the same. So the first client that I have is they have no concerns about their economic safety planning and they don't want to talk about any assistance relating to their financial state. They find it insulting that we would initiate this conversation and they're adamant that they're completely comfortable financially and they don't want or need any help in that area. So that's the first client. And then the second client we have is someone who identifies their experience as economic abuse. They explain that they have been forced to sign financial documents without understanding what they were, and their abusive partner has control of all of their earned wages from the last 2 years. They have shared assets, although the client is not sure if their name is included on anything, and they have children in common. The client is not interested in pursuing anything involving criminal law, but they are interested in exploring options to increase economic and physical safety, as well as potential family law options. And then finally, the third client, they have just physically left the home shared with the abusive party. They have poor or little credit, and they are trying to begin saving money, but they're not sure where to start. They do not use the terms economic or financial abuse to label their experience, but they want to discuss options to assess their current financial state, increase their financial safety, and discuss family law options that might be available to them. Their current employment options are limited because of their immigration status, and they're unsure of how to navigate risks after the abusive party previously threatened to use the client's immigration status against them. So I share these 3 examples to show a tangible way to display the wide variety of circumstances that clients come to us with, and that exploring economic safety with clients is really varies based on their experience and their perceived experience. So even if we think that we know the answer, we really want to make sure that we are centering the client and doing our best to restore their agency over their own life and empower them to voice their needs once and provide the knowledge and skills that we have to reach the goals and priorities that they've set for themselves. So the takeaway from this is that it's really about restoring their agency. And then the next stage is screening. So this is where we can begin the screening stage, and we want to start by collecting information. So I just want to note that all the screening questions will look not all screening questions will look the same across the different agencies. And as we continue exploring the stages of this conversation, you'll notice that I will outline some logistics to consider within your current intake process or client conversations. I find it can be helpful to consider these things before you are in conversations with clients, but it will likely be an ongoing learning experience, which is fine. And in addition to being present during the conversation with the client, try to be mindful of what feels right and natural versus what might feel rushed or forced in these conversations so that you can make adjustments moving forward to refine how these practices take place within your specific role or organization. So before we explore what questions can be asked to gather this information, as an advocate, we want to know why we're asking the questions. So think about things like, how is this relevant to your work? How can you use this information and work with the client to increase their safety? Where does this appropriately fit into your current process? And keep in mind that there are a lot of reasons why someone might feel uncomfortable talking about their finances. This can be a really triggering topic, and we want to make sure that it can feel as natural and seamless as possible. And a suggestion that we have is to structure the conversation to center around them. And the goal we have to remember is to understand their current financial situation, their concerns, their priorities, and anything else that they want us to know. It can be really hard to not let our own perspective of what needs to be addressed be influenced here, and we have to be aware that that's always going to come in. But the more that we can be aware of our biases and be intentional with the questions we ask, the more that we can meet the client where they are and effectively advocate for them. So some examples for how to do this effectively is to try to incorporate open-ended questions. So start broadly, and then these allow for the clients to choose what they share for us and kind of guide the conversation where they feel is going to be most efficient and effective for them. And then making sure to center questions around the current impact of the situation on the client and focus on clarifying their goals and priorities when discussing. Some of these questions can include, how is your situation with money impacting your safety? What are your biggest worries regarding money? Do you have any concerns about your financial situation impacting your access to safe housing, stable income, or employment at the moment? And do you have financial concerns about your credit, identity theft, or other matters? And then as we continue the conversation, the next step is just to move from what we've gathered in the initial screening stage. So some questions that we can ask is, does this need to be separate from your initial intake? Are there urgent questions that you want to ask during the initial intake and explore further later on? And just generally finding out what makes the most sense in the context of your organization. So these are some questions that you will ask yourself to kind of guide the next part of the conversation. So the goal of this part of the conversation, as we can see on the slide, is to build context. So looking at, we're trying to build an understanding of where this client is coming from, what factors may impact their outlook, what risks, strengths, and skills we should be aware of, what existing values the client might have when pertaining to money. And all of these things can give us insight into the client's values when it comes to money and how their personal experience might impact where they feel comfortable or uncomfortable moving forward. These also give us an understanding of how people have helped or harmed this person using their finances so that we can be mindful of that and build some protective factors if that's what the client wants, and then cultivate a trusting dynamic within our agencies with the client. So some examples that could be helpful in this part of the conversation with context building is, what's important to you when it comes to money and why? Tell me more about your financial situation. What did you learn about money growing up? How does that impact where you are with money now? When you have experienced financial hardship in the past, what have you done and what has worked? And would you like to try that again? I find that this question is the most helpful because it invites the client to go back into their own experiences and pull from what's already worked with them. Sometimes a new approach might be helpful, but a lot of times it's just kind of like building the confidence in the client to go back to what has worked for them in the past. Some other questions could be, what are your strengths when it comes to money? Who's hurt you in terms of your financial situation? Who's helped you? And this information is important because it allows you to address economic safety in a way that aligns with the client's values. And it gives us a broader understanding of where this client is and how we can use their strengths, skills, and previous methods to guide safety planning and strategies. All right, so before we move on to an outline of how we can move forward with the information gathered from survivors, I just want to take a moment to check in with everyone. Are there any questions that we have so far about how to approach starting a conversation with survivors about financial safety? And are there any concerns about how and where this might logistically fit in your intake process? And then lastly, does anyone have any thoughts or ideas that came up during this discussion that you want to share with the group? And feel free to just drop anything in the chat. Okay, I'm just going to give it maybe 30 more seconds, and then we can move on. Okay, well, we can move on, and if anyone has any questions or thoughts, just feel free to, as you guys have been doing, just drop it in the chat, and we can address it as we go. Okay, so we're going to be exploring some practices that are associated with financial and economic safety planning. And before we jump into specifics of safety planning, I just want to take a second to revisit the basic definition of safety planning for a moment. So As the slide says, safety planning is a survivor's individualized plan developed in partnership with an advocate that focuses on strategies for staying safe. It is typically used with survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. In creating a safety plan, advocates discuss the unique needs and circumstances of individual victims. So just a reminder, we can't guarantee safety in every scenario. We're often working on these safety plans with the survivor because they are in an inherently unsafe environment. However, the goal is always to work with the client to being more safe. In economic safety planning, these goals and principles remain the same. We're just centering the economic safety aspect of safety planning. And this, of course, can be developed as a facet of a more general overarching safety plan if your organization already has a process where that would fit in nicely. The goal of safety planning, the economic safety planning aspect is pretty simple. We are working towards becoming economically safer by offering knowledge and tools to support a survivor's ability to work towards their own safety, prioritize their concerns, precautions, most critical to them, and restore that survivor's sense of agency and control over their financial independence. And for those goals to be achieved, an economic safety plan should address a wide range of safety needs for the survivor, work to reduce the survivor's economic risk. I'm so sorry. Based on their goals, priorities, and strength. Just one second. Thank you guys. I'm recovering from COVID right now, so please excuse my voice. Okay, so the next slide we're going to move on to is risk and resources assessment. So before we can create a safety plan with a client, we need to understand the risks that they're experiencing or those that apply to their situation. We want to discuss what risks you can identify from the information that you have so far and what feels accurate or inaccurate to the survivor. So this can include discussing the risks associated with the abusive party, like the physical, psychological, sexual, economic, access to medical care, property, children, etc. Threats to the safety of children, general life risks, the different isms or like oppressive identity factors that they might have experienced in society, poverty, mental health challenges, employment, substance abuse, education, and addressing with the survivor what feels most important, which is kind of always the golden rule with this. We also want to address their fears and priorities the clients may have. Yeah, so trying to gauge what their fears are and then asking questions like, can we alleviate that fear in a way while maintaining their safety? Some resources that we can look into with the survivor and identify with them are resources that might be available through their families, their friends, their communities. These could be resources like economic, housing, community, and figuring out what resources they might already have access to. Yeah. And then just a quick note before we move on to some steps in safety planning and that take action towards safety and security, I just want to make a reminder that even though these are steps to increase safety, they're not always safe, and the safety of each option needs to be assessed on an individual basis during the conversation of risks and safety and continuously discussed throughout the development and execution of a client safety plan. If the client does not feel like it's safe, then it's not safe, and we can't make that determination for them. So we need to be able to work within the safety of their situation and just be able to adapt to their needs and what they perceive is best for them. All right, so we're going to start going through some steps towards safety. So one step is bank accounts. So when we're looking at bank accounts, we want to look and see if there are any joint bank accounts that they might have shared with an abusive party, and then we can make a plan to have them close that. We want to look at securing existing bank accounts, like changing passwords, changing PIN numbers. There might be like a password that they might use consistently that the abuser might have access to. So just being aware of what passwords and numbers might need to be adjusted to make sure that they're not having access anymore to these accounts. Yeah, changing passwords on cell phones, computers, just everywhere that it might exist, anywhere that it might be saved, and making sure how to review how to access accounts if they're locked out, and then creating new bank accounts. And then the next step that we want to look at is financial documents. And we want to be able to address safety as it relates to financial documents. And if possible, financial documents should be gathered and put in a safe place where the abusive party does not have access. If an abusive party is in possession of these documents, assess with the survivor whether or not it's safe to try to gather the documents and make copies. If the client is able to collect these documents, make sure to collaborate on a safe location for them to be stored. Again, using the client's definition of safety. And making sure that it's not only a location safe from the abusive party, but also just generally safe where financial information can be stored. And if there's any missing documents, it can be a good place to offer tools and information on how to replace those missing documents. So my colleague Anna Michaels is going to take over with the next steps. Thank you guys so much, and thanks for bearing with me with my voice.
Thank you, Emma. So another step that can be important to focus on is savings. So if access to financial resources is a concern, we want to start discussing potential ways that a client might be able to start saving money. This can involve a few things. First, discussing the ways that a survivor might be able to start saving, even the smallest amount, and then making sure that it's stored in a safe place. This can involve navigating risks and safety, and it may be helpful to revisit some of the concerns that the survivor may have mentioned in earlier discussions. It's important to note that these conversations around savings will look different based on the perpetrator's level of access to the client and other risks that apply to their individual circumstances. This is also a great place to get creative with the client and to take advantage of some of the strengths and skills that you may have already previously discussed with the client as well. One might also consider helping a survivor brainstorm any safe places to store savings. So as Emma mentioned, the definition of safety obviously depends on the survivor, but whether that be a bank, a friend, a family member, any safe place that a survivor is comfortable with. Lastly, it may also be helpful, if applicable, to suggest developing a plan, an additional plan, if there's any risk that savings may be discovered specifically by the abusive party. Another crucial aspect of financial safety planning is addressing the survivor's cost of living. This might involve, for example, creating a cost of living plan that the client can stick to and that will help them meet their basic needs. It's important to create a plan that's realistic and fits the true needs of the client. I feel like, as we've established thoroughly throughout this presentation, everyone's priorities and needs look different, especially financially. And this budget plan, whatever you want to call it, is only helpful if you're able to have an honest conversation with the survivor to ensure that all of their needs are being accurately considered. And if the client lives with the abuser, for example, it may be helpful to suggest making two budgets. So one budget for expenses living with the abuser and then one budget for living independently. This is also another place where it's incredibly helpful to loop back to what resources this person might already have access to and which resources they feel safe and comfortable using. It may be helpful to consider and provide information for any community resources that could assist in meeting some of the client's needs at no additional cost to the client, or to consider any safe relationships. So friends, family, any other close contacts that this person may have that may be able to provide additional assistance or support. And when discussing safe relationships, it's important to consider the client's comfort level, of course, as I've emphasized repeatedly over those past slides. If a client is not comfortable reaching out to any family or friends, how can we work to get them to a place where they might feel more comfortable? Or if that's not an option, how can we help them navigate alternative solutions? Lastly, I want to discuss some additional precautions that may be relevant to a client's situation. It may be helpful to explore these options and determine the relevant additional steps based on specific client needs. These additional precautions or steps could include things like opening a credit line to use in case of any emergencies, reviewing, assessing, and monitoring credit reports for suspicious activity, discussing the risks associated with credit checks through landlords or banking institutions, especially if a client plans to take out any loans, disputing coerced or unknown charges on any accounts, and then also disputing identity theft charges on accounts, although that may require reporting to law enforcement or to the IRS. Additionally, sometimes these conversations can include a client wanting to speak with an attorney who can explore potential legal remedies to any economic concerns, any safety concerns, or any other concerns that a survivor may have, relating to things like a protective order, a divorce case, custody concerns, any criminal proceedings that may be ongoing, any immigration concerns, or any employment concerns or options. This is a really good time to plug SALI, the Sexual Assault Legal Institute. We will, of course, include SALI's information at the end of this presentation as well. But if your agency does not have attorneys on staff, it may be helpful to consider fostering a relationship with any of the amazing legal orgs in our community that provide legal rep to survivors like SALI, so that there can be the opportunity for warm handoffs to help clients explore any of these legal options. Additionally, if there's something that you can't come to a solution on how to address or mitigate, it never hurts to collaborate with other advocates or attorneys. And it goes without saying, I want to stress that we can all serve as resources for each other as we navigate having these essential conversations with survivors. I feel like we've also mentioned this a couple times throughout the presentation, but I want to reiterate that it can also be really helpful to try and get creative during these conversations. Just really trust yourself as an advocate and see what you can come up with a survivor. And then lastly, before moving on to some discussion questions and some time for just general thoughts and reflection, I want to note that it's important to not view these financial safety plans as stagnant. These conversations should be ongoing with the client to make sure that they feel like their safety plan is still relevant and working for them, and that they don't need any additional support making alterations or discussing how the plan may adapt to address any changes in their situation that may arise. So similar to our check-in for information gathering, before we move on to sort of a larger group discussion, I just want to take a moment to check in with everyone, see how folks are doing. Are there any questions or concerns that anyone has regarding building an economic safety plan with survivors or discussing the options for working towards economic safety with clients? Does anyone have any thoughts or ideas that came up during our exploration of steps towards economic safety that they'd like to share with the group? Just going to give it a few moments. So to answer some of the questions that have come up, will we hear any cases? We don't actually have any specific sort of anecdotes or case studies in this presentation, but cases will come up later on, certainly throughout SAVAT presentations, but unfortunately none that will allow us to practice economic safety planning. Emma and I actually will be participating in a presentation next week about safety planning more generally, where we will have the opportunity to practice specific scenarios and how to safety plan just sort of more generally. But that's honestly a really great suggestion for us to consider going forward about trying to apply additional opportunities for practice with this presentation as well. In terms of organizations that help women start businesses and collaborate with after experiencing DV or SA, I can't think of any. That is a great question. I'm not sure, Steph, Emma, if either of you know of any organizations that help survivors start businesses. But that it may be a question that we have to get back to you on.
Yeah, I was trying to come off mute. My suggestion would be locally, there are some organizations that do that. So I would check with your community that may help. There are sometimes some local organizations in a county or in a region that may do that. I have heard of some national organizations that are doing that, but nothing that's like coming to mind right off the top of my head. I think those are relatively new. And sometimes they don't have to be for a survivor. It might be an organization. And this speaks to Anna's point about thinking outside the box. It might be an organization that helps just women in general start businesses, or men in general start businesses, and so they don't have to say they're a survivor, but they'd still be able to go after those resources. Or if they're interested in like starting an animal protection or an animal like grooming business or something like that, there may be some economic support for the type of work they would want to do as well. So I think when you're looking at that, look to the community level to see if there are some options available there.
Yeah, and I think in a moment, additionally, we'll take a second. There are a lot of questions here about resources just generally. One of the questions in our discussion will be about compiling resources collectively. So I see there's a few questions that have come up about just resources generally, and in a moment, we'll be able to collaborate and brainstorm sort of a list in the chat of resources for us that we have used previously and that perhaps we can use going forward. And then there's sort of a specific example here. What if the survivor doesn't want to know the status of debt bills, being a very specific example of a particular situation. And I think to speak to how to address it, Emma and I touched on obviously the specific needs of each survivor will vary, and it is so important to stress how dependent it is on the comfort level are obviously approaching these conversations with a very individualized and tailored approach. But to go ahead and transition over to group discussion, to initiate the process of collaborating with one another, we want to wrap up this section of our presentation by asking you all a few questions about economic empowerment for survivors. So again, please feel free to post in the chat. The first question that we have, how have you started the conversation surrounding financial needs, and how have you used that to create a plan of action? And again, please feel free to pop any thoughts, ideas that come up into the chat. Give it a little bit more time. Totally. Also, totally fair, Danielle. Um, I think that part of the reason, obviously, we give this presentation is to be able to share all this information and to begin starting these discussions between ourselves. And so, thank you for sending that message in the chat. And then there was another message from Success. Lizzie is a young girl who was in college when she experienced admitted. Yeah, and I think that that's an example that really speaks again to each survivor has very individualized needs. And when approaching the beginning of these conversations, it's really important to understand the context, like Emma was stressing. And I think that this comment speaks to the importance of context and understanding all of the details of a survivor's case thoroughly before trying to create plans and start that conversation. If there are no additional points, that we can also go ahead and transition over to the next question, which is just going to be about providing resources. So what resources have you all used, or what organizations do you know of, or have you referred a survivor to in Maryland that were helpful and effective? Turnaround. Yeah, at SALI, I feel like we frequently use refer folks to turnarounds or any of the rape crisis centers. And then some other turnaround, Dove, Family Crisis Center, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I do want to, we refer folks to the local rape crisis centers. There's one in each county, as obviously most of you may either work with the rape crisis centers, work at the rape crisis centers, but just a wonderful resource that I know SALI folks refer to a lot. There are no other resources. We can also go ahead and transition back over. So I thank you guys for contributing the resources that you all did. I also recognize that it is Friday. You guys have had a long week of trainings, so thank you for the participation. But another wonderful resource that I do want to mention is Maryland 211. Whether you're offering their information to survivors or using it for yourself, once you've discussed what resources may be helpful to your client, you can call or visit Maryland 211's website to access an array of community organizations that you may be unaware of. This can help to establish a more well-rounded community support network for survivors who are seeking things like victim services, legal services, resources for individuals who are unhoused, shelters and housing assistance, departments of human services, mental health providers, campus health providers, substance use treatment centers and recovery programs. So just a really long list of resources that are available through Maryland 211. And then I think transitioning over to the final sort of main resource that I would like to discuss, the next slide would be plugging SALI again, Sexual Assault Legal Institute. There are a myriad of financial legal remedies that a client may have depending on facets of their case. And SALI advocates can help with financial safety planning. SALI advocates can also help with just sort of more general safety planning. And then SALI attorneys can offer legal consultations that will help identify any legal remedies that may be relevant to the survivor. So as promised, here is SALI's contact information. It'll come up again during trainings next week, but please feel free to take a photo, write down our information. It's also readily available on our website, and I think Alyssa popped that into the chat. But SALI can help advocate for a variety of things. We can help advocate for the rights of victims that are going through criminal proceedings. This can include helping to request and receive results of HIV or Hep C testing. We can also help request that a survivor's contact information or other personal information remain confidential throughout a criminal proceeding. We can also help file for claims through the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board, the CICB claims. There are also a variety of civil services that SALI provides survivors. So it'd be things like peace or protective orders. We can help address privacy issues. So that'd be related to non-consensual sharing of intimate images, for example. There are also a variety of housing issues that we can help address, termination of leases, for example. We can also help address employment law matters, whether that be sexual harassment cases, cases related to disability benefits or related to the Family Medical Leave Act. We can also assist with primary and secondary school issues or Title IX proceedings, administrative hearings, for example, or more school-specific sex discrimination and sexual harassment policies. There are a variety of immigration services that we can provide, specifically victim-based immigration petitions. So that would be VAWA self-petitions, U visas, and T visas. And then we can assist with family law cases, so divorce or custody cases. One of the few types of representation that we cannot offer, it would be civil tort representation. So that's like suing someone. But while we can't actually offer representation for civil tort cases, we can provide referrals to other organizations in the area that do assist with tort cases. And then lastly, as mentioned, our advocates are trained to complete safety planning, both financial safety planning and then more general safety planning with all survivors that call. Go ahead and give it back to Steph to finish off.
Right. Thanks, Emma. And Anna, to finish off our presentation, we wanted to make you aware of a series that MCASA did a couple of summers ago with one of our SALI attorneys on money matters. It was a lunch and learn series for attorneys and legal advocates. And you can see all of the topics on the screen here, but it went through specifically how family law, protective orders, personal property, and these other topics addressed financial issues for survivors and really talked about some of the remedies that a survivor might be able to pursue in order to secure some money for some financial stability and economic empowerment. These are all available on MCASA's YouTube channel. They're also available in oh, I wrote it down to make sure. They're available on the YouTube channel. They're also available in our online training library. So Alyssa will send the links to them in her follow-up to this presentation as well. We encourage you to take a look at them if you're going to be working with survivors in this capacity. It's got some very useful information. Each session is about 30 minutes long. So it's a real quick snapshot about what might be available to survivors. So some great things to put in your toolbox as it relates to economic empowerment and financial security. Without investing a huge amount of time up front. So then if you do work with a survivor that may benefit from this, you can go back or talk to a SALI staff member, attorney, or advocate to get some more information on that specific topic. The last thing that we want to leave you with is what we call, and we did this the other day too, what we call an away. So something for you to think about as you leave the presentation today. So think about a question or a resource or a tool you will use in your conversation with advocates about money. So we have a couple minutes for you to be able to drop that in the chat, but think about what you learned today that's really been impactful and will change the way that you work with survivors or talk to them specifically about money. So go ahead and share that in the chat as we are closing up. And we encourage you to think about that, through the rest of the day or the rest of the training. What will you use from this presentation to really help enhance and empower survivors around money? So like I said, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'm going to leave this question up here before I move to the last slide with our contact information and turn it back over to Alyssa to kind of wrap up this section. And just want to thank you all before I do that for being here this week and for being here for our presentation. We know, like Anna said, it's been a long week. It's been a great first week. We will definitely have more info for you next week. So Alyssa, I'm turning it back over to you to close us out.
Thank you. Yes, thank you all for this wonderful presentation. I've put the evaluation link into the chat. Again, we greatly appreciate all feedback as we are constantly striving to improve. If you are seeking a certificate of attendance or a certificate for social work CEU credits, you must complete the evaluation form. Upon submitting the evaluation form, you'll gain access to the certificate request form. I'll be sending a follow-up email later today with a copy of the video recording, the PowerPoint slides, and the resources that were discussed during today's training, as well as the evaluation link. And I've collected a couple of the questions that were unanswered in the chat, and I'll be sending those to the trainers for follow-up as well. So thank you all again. Sorry. Thank you all again for coming. And we hope you have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Alyssa, I did want to address two quick questions that were in the chat. Tara asked about the availability of legal counsel for survivors handling custody modifications. SALI does they do family law, but there has to be some element of sexual assault or sexual violence present in why they would be engaging in that. So you can always contact SALI or have the survivor contact SALI to see what their options are. And then there was a question here from Carly about if clients live in rural counties. If they're living in Maryland, SALI can still be a resource to them. So if they are looking for legal resources, which sometimes are scarce in rural counties, Although I will say some of the rape crisis centers in rural counties do have attorneys that provide direct service. So check with that local rape crisis center if that's not available for particularly legal services. Our sexual assault legal institute attorneys and advocates work across the entire state. So regardless of where they're personally physically located, they could provide services. Let me scan for any more questions. Great. I think that's all of them. If we did miss, oh, and Isabella wrote that the Women's Law Center does offer divorce and custody help, and theirs would not be contingent on having an incident of sexual violence or sexual abuse present. So Isabella, thank you for that resource. I don't think there are any more questions. If we did miss a question, go ahead and email Alyssa and we will address it in our follow-up emails. So thank you again all so much for being here. And yeah, hope you are able to practice some good self-care this weekend after this long week of training.
All right. Have a good one, everyone.